Hello, everyone. My name is Gretchen Rowe, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome the developer of Spelling UC, Dr. Karen Holinga, to share with you all how you can adapt Spelling UC in a classroom environment. Dr. Holinga has been working alongside families for more than 25 years. She holds a PhD in reading recovery from The Ohio State University, and she has taken research that was developed at the McGuffey Institute at the University of Virginia and applied it in theory to this very practical spelling program. We're going to walk through with you how to present this in a classroom environment, how to make it fun, how to do it briefly, and how to see success for your students. And that really is the most important thing. Dr. Holinga, it's a pleasure to welcome you, and I'm delighted to get the opportunity to make this recording so that we can have instructors and teachers have a clear understanding of how powerful Spelling UC can really be.
Thanks for having me, Gretchen. This is really fun. I appreciate the opportunity.
So you gave me a terrific handout, and I think we'll use that as the outline for the things that we need to talk about. Can we talk in generalities? Why is spelling so hard?
Spelling is really hard because the higher the reading level, the less phonetically regular our language is, because we come from so many different languages. And so when we try to teach rules to kids about how words are going to be decoded or sounded out, it's not consistent, and it makes kids crazy. So when I'm in front of a classroom, or if I'm working with a child on Spelling UC, the very first thing I'm going to talk to them about is that the reason we have to work on spelling is because it isn't consistent, and you have to develop what we call a visual memory to remember what words look like. And unless and until you can do that, you feel like you're in a free fall. So I always tell my parents and teachers, talk to the kids about that. That's the reason we have to do it. And I'm looking at my notes too. I think that kids need to understand that spelling is hard, and that it's not because they're stupid or because they don't understand enough things about the language. It's just not consistent. So that's okay.
So, and you said, one of the things in your notes, you said, we use 300 words 50% of the time.
50% of the time, yeah.
But those 300 words aren't always spelled like they sound. And you gave me some terrific examples. Can you?
Yeah, so when you have, for instance, this is a great example. For instance, if you have the word rain and you have a vowel chunk, we call it a vowel chunk, that AI in the middle of the word rain, you have two vowels together. First one's long, second one's silent, but then you have the same AI vowel chunk in the word said, S-A-I-D. And in that case, it sounds like a short E. We have words like of, which sounds like O-V, but is actually O-F. We have the word off, which has two F's, but we don't say off of, we just say off, and we just have to remember that it's got that double F. We have a word green, it's got two E's in the middle. When you're reading, your brain is contextually oriented, and it's thinking about the color green, what that looks like. Your brain is not processing, oh, that's interesting, that has two E's instead of E-A or E-N-E. So this is just tricky, and it's overwhelming for kids that are overwhelmed with rules.
And when we're going to talk about this separately, but one of the things that you said in our preparation for this is when we place a student into Spelling UC, we're looking to place them a full year behind their reading level.
Yes.
And can you outline for our teachers why that's important?
That was a great segue, because when we read, we're thinking about content. So we're thinking about following a strand, an idea. We're thinking about the characters. We're thinking about the content, and our brain is not drilling down on what those words actually look like. So it's a completely different neurological activity.
Okay, terrific. So you had said that you had some general instructor suggestions about where to fit this in the day. And one of the things I think that's really important is this is not a long, drawn out process.
Right.
This should be about a 15-minute enterprise with instructor and students together. So can you share about when would be a good time to fit that into their day as far as their classroom management is concerned.
Okay, so as your teachers are going to already understand is that we work on one passage a week, and it's the same passage every day, because that repetition creates the brain opportunity to do a lot of layering. So what you want to do is you want to get in and you want to get out. You want to keep these lessons to under 15 minutes. So on the first day, on Monday, you really should set aside about 15 minutes. You should read the passage out loud to them. You should help them with the chunking. I like to tell them how many chunks there are, and then explain to them to go ahead and do the copy work, and then they should chunk this page as well. On Tuesday, when they do the same passage, they're going to be able to do that on their own. So it's a perfect morning work activity for them to be doing it while teachers are collecting lunch money or doing something else.
Tell me why we make sure that in that copy work, we're not focusing on handwriting and we're making sure that it's done in print.
All right, because kids can only do, well, anybody can really only actually do one thing at a time. I mean, we can cook dinner and do laundry, but we can't do them simultaneously. Kids have very young brains, and they really aren't very good at multitasking until almost the end of fourth or beginning of fifth, where their brain's starting to come together and be able to put things together and be able to think about spelling and punctuation and capitalization and content and sentence structure all simultaneously. So it's really important in this project, as well as others, to keep the main thing the main thing. So when you're doing copy work, the idea is that we want them to be thinking about those chunks and the way words look, and not about their handwriting. You can work on handwriting the next week after they've already worked on the passage, but I tell the kids it has to be in print, first of all, because everything they see is in print. This isn't the time to practice your cursive. I tell them that there's got to be good spaces between the words. I tell them that the tall letters have to be tall, the letters that go below the line have to go below. Everything's got to be in lowercase unless they need capitals, of course, but everything has to look right, because otherwise the brain is going to be confused and it's not going to recognize the words.
But it's important to emphasize that you're not looking for neat handwriting, because that's what the student's going to focus on instead of the pattern in the words, correct?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So I do tell them, I said, I have to know the difference between an O and a U, but just write it so I can read it and I'm good with it.
But I think that gives us a set of rails or guidelines to know how to convey this to the students. So can we talk about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? How can you classroom manage that? If you go through on Monday and the instructor reads the passage with the students, and then do you suggest that the students read it again out loud as a group activity? Or
honestly, I think one of the things probably we ought to talk about just briefly is that you're probably going to have to divide your kids into two different groups in the classroom. We're going to, and Gretchen mentioned this a couple minutes ago, the spelling passage has to be a minimum of a year below the student's reading level, because we don't want the student to have to be thinking about new vocabulary, new ideas, that kind of thing. We want this passage to be interesting enough to keep their interest, but not overwhelming. So you're going to have one group of kids, hopefully the majority of them, that are only going to see about 6 or 8 maybe words in this passage that are challenging or a little bit tricky. You're going to have probably another group, maybe 5 or 6 kids, I don't know, out of a group of 20 or 24, that are going to find 12 to 15 words that are going to be difficult. So it's really important to separate those kids out when you do the dictation at the end of the week. But Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, have everybody do the chunking and have everybody do the copy work the same. Now, in response to your question, on Monday, I think that the teacher needs to read through the passage. I think that she needs to make sure that they know how many chunks are there, that they've marked the appropriate letters. You need to really kind of double check that. But on Tuesday and Wednesday, they've got all that work that you did on Monday, and they've got the same passage. So they can just do that as morning work or homework. They can do it. If I were in a classroom, if they had a couple extra minutes some other time, I would just tell them that by Thursday morning, those first three pages have to be done.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to step into where the logistics and the planning ahead becomes super important. And that
Okay.
is the dictation day. So can you
Correct.
talk about setting your students up for success on that first day of dictation?
Okay. Now, I want the teachers to keep in mind that we have to keep this to about a 15-minute time frame, because honestly, they just get overwhelmed neurologically, and you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot if you do it much longer than that. So give yourself permission to not feel guilty about just keeping it to 15 minutes. As you tell the kids that you're going to do this exercise, have them take their books out of their desk, and while they're doing that, tell them to grab their yellow marker or whatever, whatever chunking they've been doing that week. It's going to be really good. Get the blue marker out for consonants, get the purple one out for the BOSCRs. When I'm doing dictation with kids and when I'm in a group setting, regardless of the chunking that we've been working on that week, I almost always just have them grab the yellow marker and do the vowel chunks, because I think that there's some anxiety in front of the dictation exercise. And to my mind, the vowels are the trickiest ones, but that would be your call because you know the kids better than us. So have them, while they're pulling their books out, you're talking to them about the tricky words in the passage, because we want to set them up for success. We want to alleviate the anxiety. So they can be doing, you want them to chunk you can read the passage out loud, have them do the chunking. If I were teaching it, I would be standing up at the board and I would select the 4 words that I think are going to be the trickiest ones. And I would be talking them through that as they're doing the chunking. And in this case, with the Americana with level D, that first passage is about the American flag. So my words would be American, colonies, rectangle, and country. And as I write those on the board, I would either, maybe with the word American, I would just tell them to clap it and say American, or I would talk about the ER that's underneath that. Got my marker here. And I would say, remember, ER, IRU are all sound the same. And I would write it down as I'm talking about it so that they can hear it, see it, say it. And remember that it's an ER. With colonies, I might say, all right, there's 2 O's in the word colonies. That's going to help you because that's kind of a funky word and that might be helpful. Or because remember, we're talking about visual memory. Or I might take that moment and say, you know what? A lot of times when we make plurals, what do we do with that Y? And somebody will call out, do you change it to an I? And you say, yeah, a lot of times we change it to an I and then add ES. I might ask them about the word rectangle and say, what do you guys think is something to remember about that? And somebody will say, oh, that E at the end for no apparent reason. There you go. Remember the E. Country. What I would do with country is I would say that I would talk to them about that OU. And what I want to do when I'm quickly talking to them about these things is I want to tell them the things that I want them to remember, not the things that I don't, because you don't want that to stick in their head. So what I would want to say for the word country is look at that OU. Do you know another word that you can think of that would look like that, that might help you when I give you the word in a couple minutes in dictation? And hopefully somebody will say the word hour, and then you would write it down and say, that's it. Remember that OU. You can say all of that in about 3 minutes, and the kids are working, they're kind of listening. They might take a look at those words. And then I like for the kids to write down the 4 words that they think are going to be the trickiest for them, or they can write down mine. I don't care.
Okay.
That's the setup.
And when this dictation begins, you've got these 2 groups. You've got the group that seems like they will be more prepared as far as their treasure trove of words that they know how to spell is greater. And then you've got a group who is going to be working in a more limited capacity. Yeah. So now let's talk about how do you go through dictation with that more prepared group?
Okay, so what I would do is remember that content is the carrier. And that's why this passage is so critical, because in the olden days, when we all just gave the kids a word list at the end of the week, they would study that word list all week, get the A on Friday, and then Tuesday, it's like they never saw the word before, right? And we all have known that that's been an Achilles heel, but we never really knew what to do about it. But neurologically, we understand now that content is the carrier. So when I do the dictation, I have that in my head. So I'm going to do one sentence at a time. The other thing, remember, Gretchen and I talked about that multitasking is so difficult for kids, and especially if they feel like they're on the spot or they're in a quiz or test situation. So I will give them all the punctuation and the capitalization. You have to remember, again, keep the main thing the main thing. They've been doing the copy work all week. They've been doing the capitalization, the commas, the exclamation points and question marks at the end. So we've already had 3 days of practice with that. So what I would say is let me get to the dictation, and we have put the first word there just to get them acclimated visually. But they have the word what, and then I would say, what is red, white, and blue? And then I would slow it down and I would say, what is red, comma, white, comma, and blue, question mark. Now I'd give them a minute to write it, and then I would write it on the board. And my teaching moment in that sentence is the word white, right? Because I don't know that I've ever done this passage with a kid that they wrote white, W-H-I-T-E. They all write W-I-T-E just because they're nervous. I don't know why, but they do. So then I say, you know what? How many of you remembered that white has a W-H at the end? Because see, again, I want them to hear it. I would quickly write the word, I would write the sentence up there and let them self-check, but then I would go to that word white and I would say, here it is with a WH, here it is with a W. Which one looks right? And they're going to, because they've copied it all week, they're going to go, oh yeah, there it is. But see, that's the lesson, and that's the takeaway that I want them to have, is that words can start with W or WH. The word went doesn't have an H and the word white does, and there's no auditory difference. Again, we're back to that critical visual memory. But I would keep doing that throughout. The next sentence is the American flag. And so I'll say the American flag, the capital T, American, capital A, guys, flag, exclamation point. And then quickly I would write it on the board. Takes me 30 seconds. I don't know. And I just have, and maybe I'd say American. Keep going. It has 13 red and white stripes. Okay, it, capital I, has, and I would continue to do that.
But at the end of 10, 12 minutes, you want to be done with this process. Shut it down, whether you finish dictating the passage or not.
Thank you for that. Yes. And the thing is that all of these connector words, we use 300 words 50% of the time, all those critical connector words. These words are going to keep coming through these passages in subsequent weeks. So the idea or the goal isn't necessarily to finish. It's just to have a really rich teaching environment for about 12 or 14 minutes and then shut it down. We want everybody to feel good. We want them to feel accomplished. We want them to look back, be able to say to their parents that night at dinner, I got 5 sentences done in dictation today. And, you know, you want them to be able to leave with a smile on their face so that they're not all upset when you pull out the dictation the next day. Now, that would be how I do the class at large. And the kids that are having trouble could probably follow that, and they would probably be good to go. On Friday, you may or may not, if you can get somebody else to help you a little bit, but I never could find another teacher to pull in. With the group that's having more trouble, maybe 12 to 15 words are tricky, I would just have them do the first sentence 3 times and cover it each time when they do it. And I feel like I could do that simultaneously. And I could say, for those of you that are just going to do a couple sentences today, just follow us on the first 2 sentences, and then you can either copy them a second time, or I would have to ask them to cover them. And I could quickly tell them what the sentences are. I'll tell you, in my experience and working with this over the years, a lot of these kids know the passages after they've done the copy work for 3 days. And I just have scores of parents come in and say, well, they tell me that I don't even have to read it to them because they already know it. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. All right, so give them extra points for the capitalization. But you don't want this to feel overwhelming because it is hard, and they need a visual memory, and they're learning how to learn, and we want to set them up for success.
Okay, so you said hard, but you also have said, how do you frame that for a student? So
All
if you
right,
don't
so
define the words as hard,
we never use the word hard, because all of a sudden then that's going to trigger that fight or flight. I always use the word tricky. Some of the words are tricky, and we color the tricky parts because they're because they're tricky.
no,
Hard.
that's okay. So give me now an idea of what I should be doing with the students on Friday. I know
Right.
what we say in the handbook as far as how we instruct, but help us frame that in a classroom environment.
Okay, so I just wanted to show you that this is an example of doing just 1 or 2 sentences 3 times. I think it's helpful to have a visual. It can look like that. On Friday, I have them do almost the same thing. I'll have them get their books out. I'll read the passage out loud just to reboot the system. I'll tell them to quickly chunk passages. And you know what? Depending on your class, if they want to chunk the bossy R's, go for it. I recommend, I think, especially with the group that is maybe only going to do a couple sentences, I really feel like they need to chunk the vowels, because just the vowels are so critical, and they're just much more difficult to remember visually. But I want them to do some sort of quick chunking. I want them to jot down the words that they're nervous about, so that they've rebooted them. And then in addition to those 2 quick activities, and you may just very quickly write you might say, you know what, yesterday I saw that several of you had trouble with this particular word. I'm going to put it up on the board. I want you to chunk it. You just, again, set them up for success. Get rid of all those butterflies in their tummies. What I would do is have them, I lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
As far as the second
Friday.
day in the dictation.
On Friday, I always have them take a pencil and underline all the words in the passage that they know how to spell, because I want them to see that there's probably only 6 or 7 words, or maybe only 2 or 3 that are going to give them any problem at all. So if they're sitting there with on the E day, and so here I'm going to say, they're probably going to remember the word what, and they're going to know how to spell is, they're going to know how to spell red, hopefully white, and they can spell and, they can do blue, they can do they can do flag, they can do.
So your purpose in doing that is so that they can see that this is not as daunting an enterprise as it feels like.
And when they themselves kinesthetically take the pencil and actually underline it, that is proof to them that they actually do know how to spell those words. They're not going to buy it if I just tell them. But if they're actually sitting there underlining the word it and has and 50 and stars, they're going to think, well, okay, maybe there is only 2 or 3 words in there that are tricky.
And you said, when we talked about being specific to keep the main thing, go ahead and make sure that you provide punctuation and capitalization in both dictation.
On both days, absolutely.
Okay.
And then the other thing is too, this whole grading thing that we've, talked about on numerous occasions. At the bottom of that page, we always want them to write down how many words they spelled right. I spelled X number of words correctly. That is just a number. And the last thing I want our teachers to do is mark these pages up and grade them and circle the words that they miscued on and fill that paper with red, because that just is such a downer that they're never going to come back and they're just going to label themselves as horrible spellers. And that doesn't have to be true. So I always give the kids, it's just a goofy number. There's 61 words in that particular passage. I'll say to them, count all the words that you spelled right and give yourself 2 points for every word that you missed, but you fixed, so that they can actually get more points. And sometimes, like if they take it home and do it for homework and bring it back, I might give them extra points for that. I'll give them extra points for just using capitals appropriately and all the rest of and lowercase for good spacing between the words. You really want to tell them what to do right. That's really critical, and you want to praise them and give them kudos for that.
Great. And can you talk a little bit about the on-ramp? When should a teacher feel like they're beginning to see some success? It's not going to be the first week.
No, it is
So
absolutely
can we
not.
set expectations for them?
It takes the brain. You're really probably, if your kids are brand new to dictation and this process, you're probably not going to see a lot of overlap for 6 or 8 weeks. I mean, you're going to see it for sure, but it's going to take a while because it's almost a rebooting of the brain neurologically, and it's a very different way of thinking about how to spell. In first and second grade, we spend a lot of time on phonics and long vowels and short vowels and all that critical decoding that is so important. But there's got to be a shift at some point into using or developing, if you will, a visual memory for how to spell. And that is a process. So it's going to take a while for the brain to reboot and say, oh, okay, it's not 2 E's, it's an EA, or it's not there's a Y at the end of that word. Baby doesn't end with an E, it ends with a Y. And you just visually have to remember that. So it takes a little while to get there. It's okay.
Well, I think one of the critical examples you shared with me years ago, and I continue to share this with families when I talk to them about the spelling process, is the fact that context is so critical in having success. If I ask you to spell the word do and you don't have the context, you don't know whether I want DEW, DO, or DUE. And so that becomes absolutely essential to be able to have that context. So I think the other analogy that is really helpful, particularly for teachers, is if I gave you my water bottle here this morning and asked you to fill it with an eyedropper, it's going to take some time. It doesn't mean it's not filling, but you're not going to see that it's full and overflowing for a period of time. And I think that's an important takeaway for you as instructors to have, is you're giving these kids really good input. It will eventually come back.
Absolutely, 100%. And it gets easier and easier. And again, what happens is by the time you're into the 4th or 5th week, they're seeing that all these words are like coming back through again. And it's just a handful of vocabulary that's actually tricky.
Great. Can we talk, Karen, just a little bit about how an instructor would place a class? Because you're going to have, in a typical 4th grade class, I'm going to have kids who are reading above grade level, and I'm going to have kids who are reading at grade level, and maybe kids below grade level. So I would like you to reiterate one more time, how is an instructor going to make sure they've placed their students properly?
Okay, it really is about the reading level and about how much difficulty they're having really decoding the new words in the passage. So that's going to take a little bit of time for placement, but I can't think of any situation that I've ever had when I've taught that I would have more than even 3 levels for spelling UC. You might have some that are just not reading at all. I would hope that's not the case for 3rd or 4th graders, but I really think that by and large, you're just going to have probably 2 levels. Just have them read the passage real quick. And if they're just really struggling, then just, they're going to move up to that next level really fast as the year progresses too. And you're going to have fewer and fewer kids in that lower level. I would do 1 sentence for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Then I would have them do 2 sentences twice for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And then by Thanksgiving, I would have them be doing three sentences twice. And by January, they really should be on board.
Terrific. I think you have given us an understanding of how we can apply this in the classroom. So before we conclude, what are some things that you think that educators probably need to bear in mind about the generalities of spelling, and so that they can set expectations in their own mind so that they feel they're being successful?
Okay. I think that spelling and reading are kind of tricky when you're teaching elementary school, because unlike other things, reading doesn't necessarily get easier, and spelling for sure doesn't get easier as the levels get higher. And with spelling, the higher the reading level, the less phonetically regular the language is, because the language gets more complex. And as kids are learning to read, we're constantly adding new vocabulary. So, unlike some other subjects, it just continues to be difficult for a long time until they really get to a place where they're fluent and they're reading well comprehensively. So be gentle with yourself, and understand that when the kids aren't spelling well, that it's not a teaching issue, and it's not a I don't, it's not a character issue on the part of the kids. That this is just genuinely tricky, and you just have to kind of go one step at a time. You will absolutely get there. And, again, I would have them maybe give them some extra credit for copying those passages at night when they go home. It only takes 5 minutes to copy it, or 10 minutes at the most. And you can get a big bang for your buck if they're doing that. And that really helps with the reading too. This really, Spelling You See, is actually a concise version of how you teach a kid how to read, because it's so multimodality. But we can't call it a reading program because it's a spelling program. So, but I can't tell you how many kids this program has taught how to read because of the multimodality component of it. When you do that chunking, when the kids chunk, it forces their brains to pay attention to the details in the print. And that's really the key. And when they're doing it kinesthetically, doing that copy work with the capitalization and the appropriate punctuation, it just helps the brain enormously to understand how our language works.
Great. Terrific. I thank you so much for spending this time with me. This was awesome. I think that this will be a game changer for a lot of classrooms. Being able to see this as a doable context is enormous. And knowing that you have done this successfully and that you see this implemented successfully in classrooms makes all the difference in the world for the educators who'll be using this program. So thank you, Dr. Holinga. I very much appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.